Hello, my name is Shauna Stefanchik, President and founder of Step Up Consulting. Today we're going to be doing a video to talk about how to create high quality assessments. Just a little bit about me if you're not familiar with the work and products that I have done. My history has been beginning as a teacher in first and second grade, an instructional coach, a K through 12 district coach, principal, a regional professional development center employee working with DESE in PLC and ELA, and now as an independent educational consultant. You can see by the picture on my right why I'm not in the school system anymore, is I had two sets of twins and a single child within 3 years. But this history is to show you that I have been in education for a little over 20 years and have seen just how difficult the curriculum and assessment process to be. And the goal of my company is to create innovative practices in order to make curriculum and assessment development easier and more clear for teachers. So today, as we look at creating high quality assessments, here are the three main goals we'll be covering. We want to determine why high quality assessments are essential. We're going to look at the current standard and assessment gap that occurs across the state of Missouri, and I'm sure in other states. And we're going to discuss how to utilize the MAT to create or vet high quality state aligned assessments. So first comes this question: which comes first, curriculum or assessment? At this time, you might even pause the video to discuss what your members of the team think comes first, curriculum or assessment. I hope you were able to engage in some great conversation about how curriculum and assessment can very much be like the images on your screen, a chicken or an egg. We can have many different ways to defend either side. In our current model, we're defending the work of backward design, which came about in the late 90s through Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. And what they lay out in this book of Understanding by Design is the idea of backward design, which I'm sure many of you in the room have heard or have been through the pendulum in the 90s to know about. And what McTighe and Wiggins say in this book is that it's essential for teachers to understand the level of proficiency they would like students to master prior to determining what type of curriculum and instruction they should provide. So in this book, or in this video, what we're really suggesting is that assessment comes first, as we want to calibrate our understanding of the standards to what our state says proficiency is. In many ways, this is why we have the achievement gap that we do. There is a large gap between how we are currently instructing the standards and in what the state is assessing and determining as proficient. Our company's goal is to help create clarity of the standards so that teachers are clear on what proficiency targets at the state are in order for you to backward design your instruction to meet that proficiency with students. The achievement gap we're experiencing now is because many districts are utilizing resources and have unclear understanding of what the standards and proficiency look like on end of year assessments. So the purpose of backward design helps clarify the standards that we are teaching. What does it look like, sound like to be proficient? It clarifies the rigor in which we should be teaching the standard at. It clarifies what types of questions our students need to be able to answer, and therefore it helps clarify the instruction we need to provide to students. A bit more about the why, as many of you know, with starting in 2021, we received, well, it started in 2020, we began work in Missouri to identify proficiency or priority standards for every grade content area K through 12. Starting in 2021, 80% of MAP and EOC assessments were around those priority standards. By 2024 and beyond, 80 to 90% of our end of the year MAP and EOC assessments will cover priority standards. And the last bullet talks about if we want to be MSIP 6 compliant, and it's not really just about doing well on the assessment. That's not what we're suggesting. Though it doesn't take away the fact that schools are judged by how our students do on that. The point is we have more clarity than ever before of what students will encounter on that state level assessment. It will be a majority of the priority standards. Therefore, it's essential if we are laying out a guaranteed and viable curriculum, which is guaranteeing all of our students in Missouri are given the opportunity to be exposed to Missouri state standards. If those are prioritized at the Missouri or the prioritized in Missouri, we need to make sure that we're aligning all of our things to those, which will indirectly impact our MSIP 6 when students aren't doing well on the assessment. It's probably because we're not aligning our instruction to the priorities we should be covering, or we're using resources. Notice I call textbooks and things you're using resources. Your curriculum is your state standards. Your resources can be a part of what you use to help teach those standards. In order to raise achievement, you have to be clear on your standards and choose your resources on how you use to teach those standards wisely. So now we're going to talk a little bit about common standard confusion. On the screen, you're going to see an example of a third grade MLS, which happens to be a priority standard, R1AB. And this is develop and demonstrate reading skills in response to text by drawing conclusions and support with textual evidence. This is a common big topic that from really third grade on to 12th grade that students are asked to do that they predominantly don't do well on. So I'm going to have you pause the video, and in your teams, I'd like you to discuss or write down what types of questions should students be able to master in order to show proficiency of this standard. Begin sharing the examples you came up with as your team. Were there discrepancies in the types of items you wrote? Did you have different understandings of what proficiency of this standard might look like? Probably so. This is very common when looking at ELA standards. They are very subjective, making it very difficult to understand what proficiency should look like and sound like. In fact, if any of you had a curriculum resource with you, you might have even turned to it to find an example of a draw and conclusion question and assumed that that was proficient. But that's exactly what has caused us problems. We are using resources or subjective judgment to come up with assessment questions that in reality do not align with what students will see on the end of year state assessments. Not that we're teaching to the test, but we need to make sure as teachers and educator leaders that we are aligning our understanding of the standards to what the state says proficiency is, to turn that subjectivity into objectivity of clearly understanding what proficiency looks like and sounds like. Here is a typical question that a teacher might say aligns to that standard. What 2 things did Teddy learn from Nina to become a detective? Now, I didn't provide you the passage for this question, so it might be a little more difficult to understand if this question really hits the rigor of what our standard is asking. We can tell that it asks for 2 things, which does bring up the rigor a little bit. Selected response is always difficult for students, so some test taking strategies would be involved in this question. But when we think about the content, what did he learn from Nina to become a detective? Let's look at the answers. Checking the yard for clues, recreating the scene outside, taking notes in his notebook, or watching a detective show to get ideas on how to solve the mystery. Again, we haven't read the passage, but even from the choices, it looks like there are some explicit and implicit choices to choose from that would require a student to draw conclusions. So for all rights and purposes, we could look at this question and say, yes, this would judge if a proficient student could draw conclusions. Now, if we want to calibrate ourselves to see if that is correct, here are some state documents we could be using that all of you are probably familiar with. There are item specifications available to you that have unwrapped the standards and show sample stems of what questions should look like. There are MOLE blocks, which are available that show sample map-like questions that students should answer. And then we have, although they're old and the same for many years, but map released items, which are always solid in helping anchor us in the types of thinking and question type students should answer. What we've done at Step Up Consulting and what you probably have in front of you or have access to digitally is the Missouri Assessment and Teaching Tool. So I want to show you briefly how this tool is going to help you when creating and vetting assessment questions. When you open up your digital or hard copy tool, you're going to see a template as seen on this screen. You'll notice at the top it has the grade level, what the standard is, the theme, which is drawing conclusions and providing textual evidence. You're going to have the actual prioritized standard. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see 4, 3, and as we go down, a 2 and a 1. Now, what makes the scale different than typical proficiency scales? While it's typical on the left-hand side with 4, 3, 2, 1, on the right-hand side is where the assessment part comes in. It has correlated question types and examples that show you with explicitly what it should look like, sound like, what students should be able to perform in order to be proficient. And you can see on the screen, we've kind of amplified on this level 4. You'll notice these are straight from the item specifications, or when there was a released item, you'll notice the screenshot down here. We've included it right for you. So at a glance, you can see, according to our state, this is what it should look like and sound like to be proficient. So all of these great state resources have just been tied into the right-hand side of this tool. And our company believes it's the clarity of the assessment side that really brings clarity of the standard in knowing what proficiency is. So you'll see under this level 3, it will tell you there are questions on the map practice form, and your digital ones will have a link, or hard copy will have a bit.ly, so you could easily read the passage if you'd like, or use that question with students if you'd like. Question 3, and then all of these questions in session 2 align to that standard. And then we've pulled out the ones that we think would be most beneficial for you to look at. Particularly number 2, circle the sentence from the passage that explains why he should have won the contest. Look how different. Do we ever ask our questions like this? This is what we're wanting you to notice, not only the content rigor they're asking students, but also the question type. The goal for us is that if you can see these example questions, it will help you vet or create similar ones, so you are addressing the rigor and content of what students and calibrating with what they would see at the state level. And you'll notice the level 2 also has item specs and sometimes examples, because we're wanting you to understand the difference between a level 3 question, a level 3 student, and the types of questions they should be able to answer, and what a level 2 should be able to answer. And also keep in mind, when you find that students are living in level 2s and still not being successful, we have beefed up our mats a bit more under the level 2 to give you specific skills and ideas of how to teach that more intentionally. So now let's get back to the question. We're drawing conclusions. I have on the screen here is a 3rd grade example. And the unwrapped standard is we're drawing conclusions and we're trying to cite that with textual evidence. So if we pulled up that, so we're going back to that question we looked at about Teddy and drawing conclusions, and we're vetting, did that question quite perform? Let's look at what a level 3 kid should do. They should be able to look at an illustration and answer how it adds to the text. They should be able to look at a passage and underline text and identify 2 underlined sentences that support the idea. They should be able to tell you what evidence supports that idea, and they should be able to tell you and choose a conclusion that is best supported. Oops. And in this example, it says, evaluate the source and use your knowledge of social studies to answer this question. What is significant about the location of Missouri's capital city? And if you look at the choices, it's located on a highway, it's the largest city, it's located where two rivers meet, or it's the northernmost part of the state. Again, we don't have the text in front of us to see if it explicitly says that to students, but it does look like a higher level thinking if that might be confusing to a student to understand which of these reasons would make it important to be the capital. So under the level 2, again, we can see assessment examples, and we're going to go back to this typical question. After looking at our mat, do we think this question of what did Teddy learn from Nina hits the standard? Pause the video at this time. I'm going to show on the screen your mat, and I want you to discuss, does this question of what two things did he learn to become a detective hit the standard of what you're seeing in these item specs and in this question? Hopefully you had some great discussion around this question, and I'm hoping you came away with some of these key takeaways. The current question didn't align to a 3 because it was only assessing half of that question. It was only doing the drawing conclusion part. It didn't hit evidence. So I could agree that the drawing conclusion would hit the rigor of the state standard, but it would need a secondary part B question to hit the full standard. So that leads to point 2. It doesn't assess the evidence, so only half the standard is shown. Level 3 STEM show indicating a proficient student, they would also need to be able to look at several pieces of evidence. Source 1 and source 2, that brings more complexity than just looking at one passage. And the biggest difference between the level 2 and 3 questions is level 2 require more one step in drawing conclusions, while the level 3 really do the complexity of drawing conclusions and providing textual evidence. You may not have been able to look at that mat as in depth, but this is just to show you an example of when really analyzing those questions, determining the difference between level 3 questions and level 2, and determining, does my textbook or do my current assessments live in the level 2 section or the level 3 section? And of course, while it is always okay for there to be level 2 questions on an assessment, we of course always want to make sure that we're providing opportunities for our students to be engaging in level 3 type questions. I'll get ready to summarize this video by saying, when creating state-aligned assessments, you'll always want to anchor back to your pacing guide and identify within this unit what priority standards are going to be assessed. Once you do that, you can use your Missouri Assessment and Teaching Tool, digitally or hard copy, to find those priority standards. Once you do that, you're going to look, just like we did in this video, at the question stems and the assessment sample types of what that question should look like and sound like. And you can either use items you already have, or I'll show you in a moment resources our company can provide to you to help make sure that you are giving examples that look like that. Once you're clear on what a difference between the level 3 and the level 2, we suggest creating 2 to 3 questions for each priority standard. And again, those are linked right in there for you. So if you want to use things from the released assessment or the MOBLOC assessment, we would encourage that. After you've created your question, we also always encourage you to come up with a scoring guide for your answers, just to make sure you're calibrated with your team or yourself of what proficiency should look like. One of the things our company can provide to you that we will share if you're using our resources is a digital folder with sample assessments. So once we give you that link, it will open and look like this. You'll see we have a folder for each grade level, and inside we have some exemplar assessments that you could look at to support you in creating your own. An example will look something like this. You can notice at the top that we've listed all the standards that will be in the actual assessment, helping you to determine if you can use some of the questions or passages. Don't always rely on the bolding to be the current priority standard. You're going to want to check that. But these were created using our tool. So you can read the passage and you'll notice that the questions used on these assessments are very much map-like. And here's an example of a scoring guide. And what we would suggest is an exemplar version where it has the standard code, what question, what the answer is, and then how many points would be possible. If you have our instructional focus conversations protocol book that came with the mat, it will have hard copy examples of this assessment and the scoring guide in it for you to anchor back to. Here it is. This is what the cover of that book should look like, helping to use that tool. You'll notice within inside of that, to take this video even further, you can look at the creating using the mat assessment using the mat on page 10, or analyzing and vetting your current assessments and banks on page 11, which will again go through these steps and give you a protocol to use with your team to do just that. That is the end of this video on demonstrating how you might use your mat digital or hard copy tools to create high quality assessments. Now it's your team's job to decide your next steps. Please feel free to reach out for sample assessment folders or any additional information you might need. We hope to see you soon, and best of luck.